Hello and welcome. I'm Robbie,
And I'm Jay.
and you're joining us for episode 19 of Generations Apart, the podcast where we chat about gaming and technology across the generations, sharing our perspectives on the past and our excitement for the future. On today's episode, we're talking about smartwatches, diving into a bit of the history and then the different use cases and maybe some of the drawbacks as well. Here we go. Before we get into that, though, Jay, what's piqued your interest this week?
Well, I am going to break with tradition and I'm not going to talk about ChatGPT or virtual reality, which is basically almost what I always go to for my piqued interest. Instead, I'm going to talk about TV, which we don't normally do on this podcast, but it's relevant through the lens of gaming. So I wanted to talk about a trailer which has been around for a few weeks now. But I only recently sat down and actually watched it, and I just wanted to share it because I think it's an obscure choice, first of all, of a game franchise to convert into a TV series. For those watching on YouTube, Robbie's playing it now. Worth going and checking out. It's got Anthony Mackie in it, also known as Falcon / Captain America, the Marvel universe, and it's a TV series, I think, not a movie. It's a TV series based on the PlayStation franchise Twisted Metal, which I have no idea how they're going to turn into a TV series. But the trailer simply shows Anthony Mackie in his car blasting across some roads in America, shooting guns out the front of his sports car, and then it ends with a very creepy. I think it's the clown whose name has escaped me. What's the clown's name? I should have looked that up. I don't know what his name is. But anyway, it's the clown, the famous clown from the Twisted Metal series, and it ends with him in his ice cream van. And it's out in July, so not long to wait, as we're recording this now. And I just thought I'd share it because I'm just so confused, Robbie, and I wanted to talk about it. I just don't understand how they're going to turn Twisted Metal into a TV series.
Twisted Metal,
Any
then.
thoughts?
So tell me about the game, because I actually don't know the game. You'll be shocked to know there's a game I don't know about.
The game, are you? So, Twisted Metal was incredibly popular back on the PS1 and hasn't really found any popularity since, frankly. It's one of those games that people keep calling for a reboot of. I think it got one on either the PS2 or the 3. It didn't do very well. But back in the day, it was effectively a car combat game. So there were different numbers on each of the games, but various characters to choose from. I think there was at least 3 on the PlayStation 1, 3 games at least, and each one would have a series of different cars, different drivers that would that you would choose to play as. They were always associated with their own car, though. So you had the clown and his ice cream van; they were always linked together, and each of them would have different weapons and different attacks. Think Mario Kart, but really, really angry, really angry Mario Kart, and it usually tended to be. I think, and I didn't play it a lot, it was arena based. So think Mario Kart, but not the sort of GP race around the tracks and compete. It was more the balloon battle, but with weapons of destruction and rockets and guns and whatever else. And I distinctly remember there being a level based in Paris and that centered around the Eiffel Tower. And obviously we're talking PS1 visuals at this point, so they didn't look great, but the tower made it iconic. I remembered that bit specifically. I didn't own it. I didn't have it on the PlayStation. I never really got into it particularly, but I just remember it being dark and gritty, kind of a bit silly at the same time. Just mad vehicle combat, basically. So when I heard that this was being converted I think it was announced at a similar time as The Last of Us was announced, which of course has gone on to be hugely successful as a TV series.
I think they're hoping for the same success.
I don't know, but God of War's also been announced for a TV series. Now
really?
God of War and Last of Us make sense. They're story-driven, narrative-driven games. Twisted Metal's like Destruction Derby with rocket launchers. Don't get it. Like, what is the play there? What is the TV show? Could be really interesting, and the trailer's not bad. Very short, doesn't really show you much. But I just thought I'd call it out, and it's due in July, so not long to wait. Hopefully we'll get a bit more information and context around what the show is going to be structured on. But I just thought I'd share that because it piqued my interest purely out of curiosity as to how in the world this is going to translate into a TV show.
That's a good one. It actually looks like it sounds like a really fun game. I am really looking forward to seeing the storyline that comes with this TV show, though, given that the game is just basically a punch 'em up with cars.
Yeah, and I don't know how well it plays now. Like I said, I was never really into it at the time. I guess it probably, like a lot of 3D PlayStation games, it maybe doesn't translate that well. But I'm sure you can find it relatively easy if you wanted to have a go. I don't own a copy. As I said, I never owned it growing up, so I've not been inclined to buy it since. It might be, actually. I wonder if it's on the PlayStation Mini, which is an awful mini, but I own that. It might be on there. It might be on there. But yeah, I don't know. I'm excited to see it, and I'm not against the TV show. I just have absolutely no idea what direction they're going to go in, and how they're going to build, a multi-part series around that show, that game. Sorry.
Fair play.
There you go. How about you, Robbie? What piqued your interest?
So this week, sticking again with the GPT, the GPT AI trend. Just because it's so wild at the moment, you can't ignore it. My feed has just been filled with AI and GPT stuff on basically every platform, so it's unavoidable. I can only apologize for another GPT story, but it did pique my interest this week. So it's a post on Twitter that I saw by a guy called McKay Wrigley, and he is a developer, I'm guessing, just by the fact that he's created this add-on to GPT-4. ChatGPT-4, which is basically integrating a webcam feature with ChatGPT-4 so that you can give ChatGPT-4 vision. And the examples that he gave of what he's... I know, it's getting weird now.
I don't like that already.
It's getting weird.
Okay.
So he's got a few examples in the video, and so I can share the link to the video on Twitter as well, where he runs this program, and it runs the webcam, and there's object identification on this webcam. And he does a couple of things. Firstly, he brings up a Diet Coke can and presents it to the webcam. ChatGPT-4 recognizes it, and he asks how many calories is in this can. And ChatGPT-4 goes off on the internet and finds out first of all, that identifies it as Diet Coke, and the can and the size, and then returns to him and tells him how many calories are in that can that he's holding. That he didn't say Diet Coke. He just showed the can. So really impressive. That's the first example. The second example is he brings up a toothbrush and says, tell me what this item is and order me one on Amazon. And ChatGPT-4 goes online, identifies it as a toothbrush, goes on Amazon and adds a toothbrush, the first one I could find in searching on Amazon, adds that to his basket on Amazon. So another amazing kind of real life integration. And then the last one is he brings up an iPad with an image of Keanu Reeves as John Wick and asks ChatGPT-4, who is this man? Tell me a bit about him. And not only does it recognize it as Keanu Reeves, ChatGPT-4, but also the fact that it's kind of a poster from the John Wick series and gives a bit of a blurb about the film and the character and the backstory. So yeah, an incredible video about giving ChatGPT-4 vision.
And I can't tell from the slightly sketchy video on Twitter there, and also the quality of the webcam. This guy doesn't look that old to me. Is that a kid?
Yeah, I don't know how old he is, but he does look like a teenager. Yeah, wow. Very impressive. So he's just developed this on top.
It's incredible and incredibly worrying because, let's be honest, if you had the skills to do that as a teenager, as you know, we once were, Robbie, God knows what we might have done with it.
Incredible.
That's incredible power in the hands of a very young person. And that's not a bad thing. I just think, wow, like what kind of irresponsible things might I have done with that when I was of the age? That's incredible though, and I've always been really impressed with sort of computer vision and sort of image recognition. I think it was I've seen demos of the Tesla and the way the Tesla systems recognize objects and then translate that into decisions when doing self-driving cars. and there's a huge number of the use cases for that kind of technology. Enabling that then with GPT-like capabilities is frightening. Can I ask, because it's not clear, obviously, when you were showing the video there for those watching on YouTube, obviously couldn't hear it. Was he speaking to the webcam?
Yes.
And it was doing speech to text, or was he having to type the prompts?
He was doing speech to text as well.
Wow. I mean, I know that's not new, but
no, I know.
This is just the linking of all these different technologies, isn't it? He's taken speech to text, he's taken optical recognition and the sort of computer vision, and then he's just basically bridged the gap with GPT, which is incredible. And that's amazing, what GPT seems to be, isn't it? At the moment, it seems to be almost like a bridging service for these other technology solutions that previously had no kind of intelligent way to communicate.
It's like really adding impressive. A brain to a translator and a camera, essentially, is what it's like. Just attaching. Well, GPT is just a brain, and you can add it to all these different ideas and products that you might want to.
Which is mad, isn't it? I mean,
it's an open source brain that anyone can use.
There's limitations to what he'll have been able to do with that, but if he could do that in his bedroom with a webcam, what can multi-billion-dollar corporations do with limitless research funds and hardware and technology? I mean, what is it already being used for that we just don't know about?
Yeah, amazing. And if they're not looking at this, people like this person is just going to take over the world.
Yeah. Do you remember? Was it Minority Report with the adverts that were tailored to your needs? So when you walk past a billboard, it would scan your face, recognize you, and you would get a tailored advert.
That's creepy.
Played to you. Do you remember that?
No, I haven't seen it.
You've never.
We've been over this. You give me a rant already about not seeing Minority Report.
Really? I've already moaned about that one.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, there's second reason to go and watch it. I can't believe you as a techie haven't seen Minority Report. It's fascinating.
Shameful,
you need to, because actually it's becoming increasingly relevant
to
to things that we kind of live with day to day now. I think you need to go and watch Minority Report. That's homework. You and Christina need to sit down and watch that at some point. Do it on the airplane. Take it on your iPad.
True. I'll keep
that. You've got a long old flight there. Put it on the list. Honestly, you'll like it. You'll really like it.
I've heard nothing but good things.
I imagine watching it now would be weirder than watching it then, because most of what was in it then was so far-fetched. It was like, crazy sci-fi fantasy movie. Now there's stuff in there that
happening next week.
Yeah. The main underlying story is about people that can see the future, precogs. So we're not quite there yet, but the stuff that goes around it and the technology and the things that happen in that film, are they're frighteningly real now. Anyway,
Spooky.
Fascinating. A good one. I like that. It's not slightly scary.
Yeah, very scary.
Most of these GPT things tend to be at the moment.
They do, yeah. I'll include the link of that as well, so you can check it out. But definitely, I guess, follow McKay Wrigley on Twitter if he's going to be doing more development projects like this. And just generally, keep an eye on the open source and development space, because they tend to come up with the coolest concepts exactly like this. So cool. So today we are chatting about smartwatches. And I thought I would start with a bit of the history of smartwatches. And I was surprised in my research how far back this actually goes. I was expecting, late 2000s, early 2010s. But do you know, I purposely didn't put it in the show notes in case you took a peek. Do you know when the first, the market decided this is the first real smartwatch? And it was the Timex data link. Do you have a guess?
It would have to be a guess, because no, I don't know.
Okay.
Right, I'm thinking back to when did I start hearing about like wearables? I don't know, like mid 2000s, 2010.
Okay. Yeah. Good guess. So this is 1998, I believe.
Okay.
And
right.
We should probably call out pretty early on in this episode what we define as a smartwatch. The reason I think this is the kind of default go-to the first smartwatch is because it was actually able to connect to your PC. And this is the first one of its kind that could do this. So this is the Timex data link. And it was actually aimed to be kind of a wearable replacement for PDAs. If you remember PDAs back in the day, with they're basically smartphones before there were smartphones and only computers. But essentially what it was able to do is actually download data wirelessly from your PC. I think it was a specific technology you had to have, or software at least, in the PC to be able to do it. But that, in my mind, and most of the market, I guess, is what's determined this as the first smartwatch. Let me
Not the Casio calculator watch, then, no?
Well, okay. So again, what we can call a smartwatch. I think this is a smartwatch because it's able to wirelessly transfer data. So it's pretty close to being, and it was aimed to be like a PDA style thing. But arguably, a calculator on a watch is pretty clever. Maybe even classed enough as a smartwatch. There's also, I remember back in the day, you could have a TV remote built into your watch as well that had an infrared blaster, so you could change the channels. And
I don't know if an actual consumer version of this ever existed, but I do remember Dick Tracy had that watch communicator phone walkie-talkie device.
Yeah,
that I used to think was pretty cool as well. Back when that movie was relevant, and I know that's very old. So, but anyone gives me crap in the comments for that one, I appreciate. That's a very old film now. But I do remember him having a communicator watch, and as a kid thinking, that's so cool.
Yeah, like walkie-talkie watches, things like that.
Yeah, I think they brought out like a walkie-talkie toy watch and stuff like that. But
yeah,
I don't know. I guess. So, what would your definition of a smartwatch then, for the purposes of this episode, or in general?
Well, I think it might come out as we're going through. I'm still not 100% sure what I would define as that, but I'm fairly on board with the consensus that it's some form of interconnectivity between devices, that's able to be done wirelessly. At least that's what I'm thinking as well from the devices that I've seen, and we'll go through a couple of them today. Something that's able to collect data whilst you're wearing it, as well as transfer data between that and other devices, and also receive data from another device as well. That's what I was typically, I think, define as a smartwatch.
Tricky, isn't it? Because if you think about the mobile phone, the mobile phone before we had the smartphone could do a lot of those things that you just described, but we didn't call it a smartphone. We didn't call it a smartphone until it became what we know phones are today. So, my Nokia 3210 had a calculator. It could send data. I could browse the internet, although it was very primitive. I could play music on it, and do all those things. But it wasn't a smartphone until Apple either Apple coined the phrase, or they put the device out, and we all followed this trend and we changed it. So I guess what was the turning point for a phone becoming a smartphone? And is the same criteria true for a watch? I don't know.
I'd imagine not, because I'd have thought, my assumption of smartphone was that it was specifically able to connect to the internet.
But phones could connect to the internet before smartphones.
I would still call that a smartphone, though. Retrospectively, I think the term hadn't come around. But I think retrospectively, that was the collective term for anything, any mobile phone device that could connect to the internet. But I could be wrong on that.
So it's internet enablement then.
Which is why I think it's a different definition to watches.
I was going to say that. Okay. So we're not using the same. We're not saying internet enabled watch, therefore makes it a smart watch.
I wouldn't have thought so. Because
interesting, isn't it? Because that's difficult. Because as you said, watches can now do a lot of the things that our phones could do back then, and more. Obviously, there's more.
True.
Interesting.
But I don't think it's necessary. Like, I'd have thought the reason smartphones were, categorized and defined as smartphones is because accessing the internet was necessary and useful, as we had it, on PCs at the time. Whereas if you've got a smartphone, you don't really need your watch to connect to the internet, right? So I think it's more about what would make it smart, something that you don't already have on your person that it's able to do. And we might get into that when we talk about the fitness tracking, health data, and things like that your phone can't do whilst it's sat in your pocket or nearby. But I think it's the fact that it can collect data and connect between devices. Which I guess if you were going to apply that to phones, arguably that's much earlier than the traditional smartphone. But yeah,
and it's funny, isn't it? Because there's a whole load of things now that have become smart, air quotes, as a result of being given functionality that no one cares about. There's a brilliant one I saw in a talk about product management, and it's I think it was a salt shaker, a salt dispenser that was first of all it was like button operated, so it would grind the rock salt at the press of a button rather than you having to, God forbid, manually crank it.
Yeah.
But what really set it apart is that it had a little LED ring light that would glow. When you put it on the middle of the table, it became a centerpiece, and it could be used as a Bluetooth speaker. And this guy was calling it out as a ridiculous product that no one actually needed, who wanted their salt shaker internet enabled. But that was like a smart salt shaker.
I'm sensing a topic of a future episode: gimmicky smart devices as well, because there's also like smart ovens.
To the idea list, Robbie. I think you've cracked it.
Smart ovens, and smart fridges, and oof.
Yeah, we should definitely capture that, because there's something to be said about that. A lot of things just get the brand smart because they do more than the thing was meant to do. I've got a smart oven. It's a microwave.
Yeah,
it's also an oven, but Samsung call it a smart oven. It's not smart in the slightest. It's entirely button operated. It doesn't do anything that I don't tell it to do. It's got no internet enabled features whatsoever, but it's a smart oven. So,
that's
anyway,
what I think is the issue with comparing the definition of a smartwatch compared to a smart phone, right? Because a lot of the stuff that a smartwatch can do, phones have been able to do for a long time before they were even called smart. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it probably did, as you say, start as maybe of a marketing thing, and then other types of devices have started to adopt it as just something that the device wouldn't typically do, but can do a little bit extra. And
it's interesting, isn't it? Because I know we're going to come on to this and to talk about wearables, but before wearables were trying to replace your watch, a lot of them still told the time and did things that your basic watch could do, but they did more.
Yeah.
And then wearables kind of evolved into smartwatches. It's a strange thing, isn't it? They went from being an accessory that could do some of the things you watch do, but you didn't wear them for that reason, to actually a fashion accessory that now was capable of replacing your watch altogether. And parking that more manual watch that you perhaps enjoyed, or your fancy timepiece, has now been ultimately replaced. I guess we'll get on that journey.
Are you thinking about like the traditional fitness tracker before the really early days fitness trackers? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I can't remember what mine was called, but I know when Fitbit was kind of first getting on the market, there were a couple of other rivals. I think I had a Samsung one. I think it was Samsung, and it was just a sort of thin black band that would track your steps primarily.
Yeah.
Don't think it did anything more than that. I'm not sure it had heart rate monitoring or anything like that. But of course, it had a little LED screen, and that LED screen could tell you the time.
Yeah.
So, if you just wanted the time on your wrist, you had it, but you also had step tracking, or whatever the basics of that were.
This might be where we get into the debate about it, because I was going to go through. So the history I was going to go through. We've got the first watch there. I was going to go through some of the. I was going to go more on the history of specific brands that are more popular today as smartwatches. Yeah, so on the list, I've got Garmin, Fitbit, Samsung, and Apple. But when I was doing my Fitbit research, I found they had fairly early devices that were these plastic kind of square, like rectangle things that you could tuck into your clothes or tag to your shoes, and they actually had like a wrist, like a band that you could slot it into, but it didn't tell time. So that I actually discounted that as the smartwatch, because it didn't tell time, although it did have some of the smart devices. So my first Fitbit device on here is actually much later than that, where it does all the fitness tracking as well as being able to tell the time. But maybe that's debatable.
So interestingly, they haven't wandered too far from that form factor, because my daughter's just turned 8, and for her birthday she asked for a Fitbit. And I was like, oh, what does Fitbit do for kids? So I had to go and find out, because obviously I don't use Fitbit anymore. I used to have a Fitbit back in the day. And her Fitbit, it's called the Ace 3, and it's exactly that. It's like a small tablet-like shape, tablet, graphics tablet, like swallow a tablet.
Yeah.
Obviously on a larger scale, and it pops into a watch strap that she can wear conveniently on her wrist. But in order to swap the straps, this little self-contained unit pops out of the wristband.
Yeah.
And can be put anywhere. This one now obviously does tell the time. It's got like basic smartwatch style functionality. She can get notifications on it. She can do timers and do a step tracking and activity stuff. But they're still making that form factor in terms of the contained device without all the extra bits. But I suppose the Apple Watch to a degree is that, isn't it? Straps pop off. It's
true,
a little mini unit. But anyway.
There might be a reason why those kind of devices are still popular, though, and we'll come on to it later when we come back to the drawbacks, I think, of smart devices. And sometimes you want it to be less smart for being present in your day-to-day life. But we'll get onto that, and I think in a bit. But so going back to the history, so I was just going to start with so the next. I've been going kind of in order of when they were released as well. So the next one on the list is the Garmin Forerunner 101, and this device it looks pretty dated. Not going to lie, looks even older than the previous one I showed. But it's actually quite a large device that fits around your wrist. I think it's something that you wouldn't typically wear all the time as a watch, but more something that you would go for a run for. And the Forerunner series has gone on to do, many, many more devices. Nowadays, they're really, really high tech and specifically aimed for tracking not just running, but movement in general. So hiking and cycling. I think some of them even do swimming now. But so you mentioned just before you used to have one of these.
Not that exact one. Mine was between that and what they do now. So I think it was the Forerunner, I want to say the 910 XT, if that was a thing. Those are the numbers in my head. It was, it wasn't catchy. Mine looked a little bit more like a watch, but still very big and quite bulky. I had it when I was doing sort of half marathons and marathon training pre-Apple Watch. So this would have been early 2010s. And I had, it was quite expensive. I'll be honest, it was quite a pricey purchase at the time. It felt like one to me on whatever my income was then. And it came with, I had a heart rate monitor with it that you'd obviously just wear around your
chest,
top of your waist, and not your waist, around your chest. And then, this one was, you could swim in it, you could run with it, you could cycle with it. Those were the three core purposes. It was very much kind of a triathlon-like device. I used it for running. It was great. Loved it. I got a lot of use out of that. I've still got it somewhere. It's just redundant now because it's been replaced by my Apple Watch, so I don't need it anymore. But it was great. And Garmin famously gave you, a lot more data. It was, but I'd have to come back and manually sync it to my PC using a little wireless dongle that came with the device. It wasn't as perhaps smart as we're going to get into smartwatches now being. But, it was pretty clever, and you'd have to come back after every run and sync it, and then it would add your run data and all your lap times and everything, and the whole run basically geographically mapped for you, and you could see your pace and how you got on and how you performed, and then you could, of course, compare it and share it and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But I used to go through the pain of exporting that to Garmin, and then because my colleagues at the time, we used to have a bit of competition when it came to running, all used Runkeeper on iPhone. So then we'd have to import the run data from Garmin into Runkeeper so that they could see that I'd done a run, and we could compare our times and distances and stuff. So a whole lot of faff used to go into that, and a lot of effort that I simply wouldn't do now.
It's all too convenient.
It's all done for you. But yeah, that was felt, it was a really good thing to do, and the combination of the sort of stats and the data and the competition with colleagues made running actually really fun.
Yeah.
In a way that I never thought I would have said out loud back at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think there's a big for the more modern smartwatches, definitely there's that competition vibe or sharing data vibe that Apple and Samsung and Fitbit have really hopped on, and even using third-party apps like Strava. You mentioned being able to export the data and importing it in. That's far easier these days with API connections in the background that you don't even have to think about. So there's definitely something to be said about fitness tracking today.
It was slightly off track, but to your point around APIs, it's still not a seamless world. So even going back quite a long time now, I was trying to sync data from other devices into Fitbit and vice versa. Fitbit are really resistant to it. Yeah. So there is no way to sync your Fitbit activity to Apple Health in either direction, as it stands at the moment. And Fitbit on their community forum say we have no plans to do it. Why would we? We want you in our ecosystem by our devices. And they've got other things that do link into the Fitbit world. So I've got some wireless scales that I used to do, and I used to obsess over that. I'd get on, it would know who I was, and it would sync my weight straight up to the cloud, and it would track it for me. And that was all part of Fitbit. But I'd not used Fitbit for years, literally years, until my daughter had her birthday present. And of course, in order to set her kids account up, I had to log back into my adult account and set up the kids account as a sort of nested account. And then I thought, she started taunting me through the app with her fitness, like to create a challenge as like a taunt option. And I thought, well, I'm not going to use Fitbit. But if I can sync my steps that I do on my Apple Watch into Fitbit, then at least you can kind of see what I'm doing, and we can have a bit of competition. no way to do it. You can download third-party apps that other people have built.
Yeah.
But they charge you monthly for them, which I'm not doing, and they also don't guarantee their service because, of course, if Fitbit or Apple choose to change something about their API and that causes a problem to their functionality, then that's tough. They're not within their control. So at the moment, Fitbit do not want to know in terms of that.
Interesting how that's developed
devices.
over time as well, though. One of the things I was going to mention later is around the benefits, what the watches are, who the watches are for, whether it's like the fitness tracking or the added on to the phone where you can get your notifications and things like that. And where I think it's going is that really nowadays they're blending into the two. So Fitbit was traditionally the smartwatch that you go to for fitness tracking, and then you might go to Apple or Samsung or like an actual mobile phone manufacturer for their devices to have better connectivity to your phone and additional add-on features. Nowadays, there's less and less of a gap between the two, and in fact, the flagship Apple and Samsung devices, and I think even Google now, have some very, very robust health tracking. So they are competing on that front, and so there's not many reasons why you might not go for a smartwatch that's from the device that you have a phone, manufacturer that you have the phone device from, other than perhaps being separate from your phone and you want to be not bothered all the time by notifications and have a degree of separation that you might not get from heavily integrated devices.
I think some of the decision making will be with the way you use the device and the people you use it with as well. I mean, if I take that example I gave you of the Garmin, back when I picked that device, there were other devices on the market I could have chosen, but I was keen to make sure that I could continue to sync my run data with my Runkeeper app, because that's where my kind of friend group or competition was. And it wasn't practical to use the iPhones then for more than a 4 or 5 mile run, because your battery would be dead before you got around to the end of it, and then you'd lose it. There was a genuine problem. You'd like do a 3 or 4 mile run, forget you hadn't charged your phone, and then you'd realise with 5 minutes to spare, you're about to run out of battery, and you had to decide whether to end the run early, make sure you banked that run and saved it, or run the risk of the battery not making it home. I picked that Garmin device partly because it synced, albeit a slightly arduous way of doing it. I could sync that data to Runkeeper, and that was important to me. So I do wonder whether there's people that have them to be in those apps and in those ecosystems. Fitbit have their own competitive space where you can compete. Apple does it with the Apple Watch. I've got to imagine Samsung done it as well.
Yeah.
So is it about you? Some people will go where their friends are or where their community are.
Oh, 100%. The ecosystem is a really powerful influencer, I think, on that stuff. And nowadays, it's the phone, the smartwatch, and a lot of the other devices that you might get with that. Sometimes now it's even earbuds, like headphones, because it's in the ecosystem and they work well together. And the interoperability between different ecosystems is a major barrier for some people.
For like some of these devices that are standalone, the Garmin devices and the Fitbits, where they don't have comparable phones and other devices that people might be kind of bought into, it's where I found the Fitbit decision quite a strange one. I get that by locking you in, you theoretically sell more of your Fitbit devices, but also you alienate people who actually want to be able to partake in different communities. So by having a limited number of things that you integrate with or interact with, you're actually restricting your customers as to where they can share their data, where they can kind of play nice with your device. Whereas if I could buy a cool Fitbit device for running that also sync with my Apple Health, because I've got other things that sync with that, for example, I might be more inclined to buy it. But
absolutely.
I'm sure there's a very clever marketing team behind this who are way more switched on than I am to this stuff, but it just seems a weird choice to lock people away from other places they'd like to be. But then, there's precedent.
Harken back to our Apple v Android.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I'm saying the entire opposite that I said throughout that episode in terms of why I choose Apple. These don't play nice with my Apple devices. That's my problem.
So just going back to the Garmin Forerunner 101. This was 2003. So say 5 years. 5 years after the Timex data link. So I guess smart features in wearable devices were becoming much more popular. But this, I think, was the first real fitness tracker, wearable fitness tracker device that was, around the wrist and connected to the devices as well. and track things like your running and things like that. 2003.
Do you know what? Just a really quickly funny story, and I'll keep it quick.
Sure.
My Garmin, you've just reminded me as you were talking about that, because it was GPS enabled, which is one of its benefits in terms of being able to track your run and give you accurate data as to where you'd run and what you'd done.
That was the expensive part.
It was then, definitely. But it also meant that every time you turn the device on, because you didn't leave it on, it wasn't that good a battery life, you would turn it off and then you turn it on to go for a run. You had to turn it on and then wait while it geolocated. And sometimes that would take ages. So there were times when back where I used to live, I'd have to go stand outside to get a better signal. And then it would wait. And then also it would give you a little ding and a noise to say, oh, I'm done now. I'm ready to go. But you could be stood there sometimes for minutes or more going, come on, come on. I want to start my run. This is ridiculous. I want to just go.
It reminds me of old school sat navs. Used to be the same. You couldn't set off on your journey until it connected.
Yeah, exactly. Take all that for granted now, don't you? That these things are just connected and they're ready all the time.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to Fitbit, and this is where we have, I don't know, the debatable topic of the first Fitbit device. The first, kind of before this, that didn't have a watch. I didn't have, a display that was telling you details like the, your steps or the time. It was a Fitbit Flex 1, which I think came out, if I remember rightly, in my research. I think that was 2009, I want to say. So a little bit earlier than this Fitbit Force, which I would class as the real, smart device that they brought out, the smartwatch. So Fitbit Force came out in 2013, and this is a kind of flexible, rubberized watch strap with a very small display, like a letterbox display that has, it's black and white, it has LEDs in there, and it just tells you basic details like the time, the number of steps that you've done that day, and it didn't have anything like heart tracking or anything like that. But it was one of the early basic devices. So we're talking 2013.
I think before that, I don't think again, maybe it doesn't class as a smartwatch, but it's definitely a wearable. I remember one of the bigger brands before Fitbit got big, being Nike. Nike had some sort of movement band that used to light up as you used it. So it would, as you progressed towards your goal of activity for the day, these little lights would slowly sort of creep up. And I only remembered it well because I used to have a friend who worked for Nike as staff, and they all used to have them.
Yeah.
And there was a bit of a joke because they used to try and compete, see who could get the most sort of movement and activity. But it basically turned out that if you just shook your arm vigorously while it was on, it would frantically increase the movement, and it would make it think you were doing loads of activity.
Yeah.
And that used to have, I mean, I could call it a watch because it did tell the time. It wasn't really a watch. But I do remember that being fairly early on. I thought it came before the Fitbits. I think the Fitbits for me, I seem to remember getting really popular.
Fitbit had a very similar device to what you described, except it didn't tell time, where it had like lights indicators, and it would like 5 little LEDs that used to light up as you went through your steps.
Yeah, it might just have been that then. I know it was very
exactly the same as the Force, but it didn't have. It was like a much smaller screen, and it didn't have any detail, and it was just the lights. From what I remember, anyway.
And I remember the Fitbit Force being very popular. I didn't have one. As I mentioned before, I think I had a Samsung alternative, but I don't remember its name. I just remember it looked very similar, but slightly slimmer.
Yeah.
And more consistent all the way around the strap. But it did very much the same thing.
Yeah. And again, very much focused on the fitness tracking. So similar to the Garmin, although I had to say Garmin was more specifically to, exercise activity, whereas Fitbit was more day-to-day, regular, wear it all the time, track your movements throughout the day.
It was more like an advanced pedometer, wasn't it?
Yes.
Rather than an attempt at a sports watch. They kind of went into that lane further down the line.
There was a period in time where steps was the main thing people competed on, I remember, because the wearables back then, the smart devices or even apps on your phone that you could get were specifically focused on tracking your steps and not much else.
I remember colleagues getting up at lunchtime and being off for a long walk around the lake or whatever at lunch just to get the steps in.
Get my steps in.
I definitely remember that. And I also do remember pedometers as a sort of another form of step tracking. My stepdad was very much a big fan of pedometers. I think I bought him like 3 over the course of a number of years because they would obviously fail over time. They were crap and cheap by comparison. I do remember the Fitbit wars. And it's interesting, Fitbit kind of became the name for wearable fitness devices, even a bit like you Google search but you don't necessarily use Google. You might use Bing, but you call it a Google search because in your head that was kind of the brand that dominated at that time. Which is why when my daughter asked for a Fitbit, I was very confused as to whether she actually wanted a Fitbit because they'd been so far out of my consciousness for so many years now. I wasn't sure what they still did, or whether or not that was just what the friends were calling, because they do loads of kid-friendly smartwatches that are off-brand. But pleasant surprise to find they're still going and going strong.
Yeah, and that's what they were synonymous with that fitness wearable brand, and over time, as the I suppose more smartphone added on features, smart devices like the smartwatches that have enhanced your phone experience have become more and more advanced with their health and data tracking. I'm surprised, as you might be are as well, that they're not kind of marginalized out of the market just because the competition is so fierce with the ecosystem and Apple and Samsung and Google kind of dominating the smart watch as well as the fitness.
They're not part of Google now, though. I thought Google bought Fitbit.
They brought out a smartwatch recently that has health tracking, heart rate, things like that.
No, but I think Google bought Fitbit.
Oh. Breaking news.
No, I think this is years old. I'm sure Fitbit were bought by Google.
Did they? Okay. I'll do a quick
double check, because I might have that. I don't want to leave something in that's factually incorrect, but I feel like that was because I'm sure when I was setting up my daughter's one, it said you might need a Google account as part of the setup process. And I remember thinking, why would I need a Google account?
You're absolutely right. 2.1 billion back in 2019. Google bought Fitbit. There you go.
Because I think at the time they hadn't released the smartwatch of their own, and it was one of those, well, we could just buy Fitbit rather than make our own. So it might be that the Google Watch you're referring to is heavily influenced by or uses Fitbit components.
I imagine it would be. And then it gets the best of both worlds, where it has the Fitbit advanced health and data tracking, as well as being built into the ecosystem of Google and Google smart devices. Interesting. I didn't know that. Well, it's interesting that they've got both then. You would have thought they would have merged the devices that they create, because the Google Watch, as far as I know, is completely separate. It's not named Fitbit. And similarly, Fitbit don't really share that often in the public eye that they're, I guess, owned by Google. So it's a weird separation that they've got.
Could be similar to the Nest engagement, though. So Google own Nest, but they still sell all their products as Nest.
Yeah.
Well, they did, but now I'm trying to think now. The cameras I bought, because I'm in the Nest ecosystem, and I curse at Google for that, because Nest used to have a brilliant Apple TV app, which was great for just popping your cameras up on your TV and just kind of checking what was going on. They killed that when Google bought them. It never got it. That's dead. So you can't use it anymore. It's really annoying, because that was one of the main reasons I bought it.
Yeah.
And then they instantly killed it. But I guess it might just be. It'd be interesting to know, if you bought a Google Watch, do you download the Fitbit app to set it up, or have they got an entirely separate app that they do with it?
Good question. It's a good question. And I didn't actually have Google on the list here to look into the watch, so I haven't looked it up myself, but maybe that's something to look up after this.
Episode 2 of
Smartwatches, yeah. Well, who knows? I mean, the devices that, or the advanced features that are going to come out in the next year or so could be quite cool. So maybe we might revisit it then. But moving on from Fitbit, we go on to Samsung, which I was surprised actually was out before the first Apple Watch. And we're looking at 2013, the Samsung Galaxy Gear device. And it's actually, looking back at it, quite a good looking device. Like, I wouldn't be offended at wearing that today. It looks quite modern and sleek. It's quite flat on the front with some glass and brushed steel, it looks like, as the kind of main cover. And it looks relatively futuristic. It's square as well, like the Apple Watch. They've since moved away, and their devices are more circular, like a traditional watch. But
I do remember when that first came out, mocking it for being square and going, "Who'd want a square watch?" And
look at us now.
Fast forward a few years, it does. You're right. It does look smart for that. Like you say, for those watch on YouTube, you'll be seeing it now. But if you've not seen it and you're listening, then check it out. The Galaxy Gear, very slick actually. Looks a little bit though like a Casio keyboard watch without the keys.
Yeah,
similar form factor. But I do have a very vague memory that they were out first, because I seem to remember. I'd got a colleague who was very like you, Robbie, who used to just love tech of all brands and would buy them all and flip flop between brands, whatever came out that week.
Yeah.
And he had one of these, and of course, famously, like most Samsung devices versus Apple, they were infinitely more customizable, and he had it doing some fantastic stuff. And I think at one point he had the GoldenEye watch theme on the
Nice.
watch, and it played the music, and it had the pause menu, look and feel from the GoldenEye N64 games. And I remember thinking, that's so cool.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that predated Apple Watches, because as we'll talk about shortly, I had the first Apple Watch, and that definitely happened before I owned mine.
Yeah, this was out a couple of years before, and we'll get onto the Apple Watch in a second. But yeah, really early tech, and it was using... So I think in one of our earlier episodes, I was talking about smartwatch software, and this reminded me as I was looking through this, the research for this. So Samsung on all their watches, and I think to this day, they still do this. They use an operating system called Tizen, which is a proprietary one, but it is actually built on Android. So in my previous episode where I said it wasn't Android, I was mistaken. It's a custom skin on top of Android that Samsung have made themselves.
Interesting.
Just so you know. But yeah, it had an OLED screen as well. It's actually quite a large display. I can't see the dimensions on here. 1.6 inch, 41 millimeters, which is comparable to the smaller Apple Watch now.
I think that was the largest size of the Apple Watch when Apple Watch first came out.
Yeah, so quite a large
it was
device.
Either 38
really.
and 40 or 39 and 41. It was something obscure.
And
yeah,
again,
they'd about the same.
Paired nicely with a Samsung device if you had one. And I think this is where it first started to delve into the ecosystem of smartwatches and the smartphone that you pair it with. And so there was, some good features between the two where they worked well together. And in fact, at that time, I can't verify this obviously in the research at the moment, but I didn't look into this beforehand neither, but I'm pretty sure it didn't work on any other device other than a Samsung. There may have been other Android devices that it works on, but I think at the time it was more focused on, if you have a Samsung phone, you have the Samsung Watch, and didn't venture much further from that. So then we get to probably, I think, the most popular watch series now, which is the Apple Watch, the original Apple Watch, the first generation, which, Jay, if you're watching on YouTube, I'll just change the cameras in a sec. Jay, if you're watching on YouTube, is bringing up the first device, which you have a version of it. It's the stainless steel version as well. And the first generation came out 2015 when it first came out.
I had this. I remember it came, funnily enough, a matter of weeks before my daughter was born. She should have been months after, but that's a different story. Me and a former business colleague, we pre-ordered these as a bit of a treat for sort of setting up and starting some success with our business back in the day. Honestly, I was excited to receive it. Unboxing was exciting, like these devices always are. But I did struggle for quite a while, probably the first year, to really tell anyone why I was excited about this. And it's one of these purchases, when you spend big on something and then you're a little disappointed, and then people ask you about it and you feel compelled to defend your purchase. I was really struggled to tell people why it was worth buying. And and as much as I like it, and I look back fondly on that time, it didn't do a lot that really made it compelling. And because the original Apple Watch, something we take for granted now, wasn't waterproof, it didn't have built-in GPS. It was entirely reliant on your phone. So if you wanted to go for a run, you had to take your phone with you anyway. And you still demanded the phone's battery and the GPS and the processing power. You couldn't store anything on it, so you couldn't store your music on it or anything like that. It didn't. I think you could pair headphones with it, but I'm not sure that that's absolutely true, or that might have come later on. So it really wasn't. It was smarter than your normal watch, but by comparison to what you can get now, it really wasn't up to much. And for what it had cost, it was quite rightly described by some people as an expensive gadget to stop you getting your other expensive gadget out of your pocket. Because you'd look at your notifications and go, I don't need to get my phone out and read that. But really beyond that, it didn't do a lot. Battery life genuinely was pretty good. Wasn't much different to what we get out of a standard Apple Watch now.
Really?
But obviously it did a lot less, so perhaps it was just because it was less demanding.
True.
I didn't have the always on screen that we have now. A lot of the things we take for granted with modern Apple Watches, this just didn't do. But it was nice to have it first. I knew buying it, like anyone who gets into any tech early. Early adopters always suffer
Yes.
for the being those early testers, and I get that, and I would
Yeah.
absolutely say that the first Apple Watch probably wasn't worth the money, but fond memories, and I still got it now, and it still works. I power it up.
It's funny you mentioned you were chatting about the Samsung device and how you had that friend who customized it with a bunch of different things. That's where I saw the major issue, I think, with Apple not really opening that up. There was a huge developer community sat behind Samsung and Android at the time and they were given the flexibility to be able to generate their own customizations and apps and things like that for the phones, but also from day one on the Samsung devices, the watches as well. And I do remember seeing at the time that there was fairly limited features on the first Apple Watch that, a lot of the other devices you might get could be customizable. Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned as well that the perception was that it was to tether you to that ecosystem. So it was another device for you to stay in that ecosystem, get your messages and things like that, without perhaps any additional features. And again, another great example of more of an ecosystem smart device rather than anything that's meaningfully fitness tracking or anything like that.
Mm. I mean, it did your heart rate and stuff like that, and obviously did your steps and stuff, and that was nice. And it was more accurate than your phone, but it wasn't that long. It wasn't that long after, I think, the iPhone, or it was, I don't know which way around it was now, but they were pretty close together, that the iPhone had that fitness chip, or whatever they called it at the time, which also could be turned on and would track your steps if it was in your pocket and stuff like that. So
that was a Nike button, or wasn't it? It was like a little Nike. You could put it on your shoes.
Oh no, right? No, this was that was a separate thing altogether. No, the iPhone had a chip that they put into one of the latter versions, which you could then turn on. It was like a motion chip.
Oh, okay.
It was like a fitness thing, so it would allow you to put it in your pocket, and it would attempt to measure your steps, which kind of made some of the stuff that your Apple Watch was doing a little bit redundant. The other thing I remember about the Apple Watch was that for the first couple of versions of the OS, this thing ran like a dog. It was awful. Like, modern Apple Watches, very much like your phone, touch, quick, responsive. Not the first series of the Apple Watch. With the first couple of iterations of the OS were really slow. It just wasn't practical to use it instead of your phone. By the time you'd navigate and messed around with the screen and tried to faff with in and out of the menus, you might as well got your phone out. Whereas now, I'm pleased to say that that's very much not the case, and I wouldn't be separated from my Apple Watch. I would feel lost without it, whereas for a lot of the time, this just felt like a quite expensive fashion accessory that didn't do a lot that was practical.
Yeah. And then look at us now. So we've both got Apple Watches. I've recently just purchased mine as I've recently switched over to the Apple world, much to Jay's delight, in rubbing in, as I was previously on Android. And, if you switch ecosystems with the phone, you have to do it with a watch because, again, they're locked typically to the ecosystem, if not entirely, at least partially. So the Samsung watches, which I was previously on, does work on Apple phones, but nowhere near as well, and actually became more of a hindrance than actually being a useful bit of tech on my wrist. So I did switch over to the Apple device. I think it's the 8, the big one. There we go. Let me show it. The 44 mil, I want to say, the slightly larger one, and they are really quite good. Very fast, very sleek. The Samsung ones were quite large, and the previous one I had. Not that that'll bother you. We'll get onto a second on the watch that you've got, but I am really enjoying the fact that this is quite sleek and understated device. Like very fits under all your clothes and things like that as well. Jay, do you want to chat about the one that you've got?
So I upgraded from the original to the Series 4, which was the first time they made a meaningful change to the hardware. They increased reduced the bevel, screen got slightly larger, and it's in the form factor that you now have today. And then most recently, because I am an elite athlete, I upgraded to the Ultra, which I was always going to do. As soon as it literally came on screen during the Apple WWDC, I went, I don't need that, but I'm probably going to buy it. And I love it. I don't regret it in the slightest. It is a bit chunkier, but I've been wearing it that long now that I don't notice.
Yeah.
And holding it next to the early Apple Watch, there wasn't too much in it, funnily enough.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's got near on double the battery life, which for me is the big benefit, because with my Apple Watches previously, my routine would be kind of get up in the morning, put it on, wear it all day, and then dock it on the night, go to bed, and get up the next morning, and start the routine all over again. So I wouldn't wear it to bed. Didn't sort of get any benefits of the sleep tracking. With this, what I now do is I can wear it all the way through the night, and most of the all of the next day. It won't go full 48 hours, I don't think, without getting right to the cusp of battery death. But it will do most of the way. And what I tend to do now as well is I've got a fast charger. I know you invested in one of these as well.
Yep.
And that fast charger will put more than enough juice into this that when I get up in the morning, I'll dock it while I go and shave and have a shower, get ready for the day ahead, and then by the time I'm sort of dressed and ready and put it back on again, it's normally back to 100% again, and I'm sort of fully juiced and ready to go. So it's great. Yeah, love it. I knew it was an unnecessary purchase when I bought it, but I don't regret it in the slightest. And it's having the big screen's nice. I don't know whether yours has this. I don't know if this is an Ultra thing or just the new OS, but mine's got a fully functioning keyboard. If I'm in messages and I want to respond to a message, it used to just be, you could handwrite, which used to work quite well.
Yeah.
But it was a bit fiddly. Now, certainly on the Ultra, and you tell me if it's existent on yours as well, like there's a full-blown keyboard, which surprisingly works well for something so stupidly small.
Yeah. I mean, mine's got a keyboard as well. It's very fiddly, though, much because I think it's because it's a smaller screen. But the swiping, I don't know if you've done keyboard swiping on Apple yet. It's actually quite good. I used to do it on Samsung quite a lot, where you can swipe across the keyboard and it's like predictive typing, but you swipe basically over where the letters would be that you were gonna type out, and it can predict what word you were trying to spell out through the swiping. That is actually really quite good on the watch, and I use it sometimes on my phone as well, especially when I'm holding it with one hand. But yeah, really great devices. I think, to be honest, hardware-wise, very similar to the competitors like Samsung. Perhaps not Google. I think Samsung is really up there in terms of the flagship hardware. Not just like the CPU chip inside, but I'm thinking specifically around the health tracking and the screen sizes and the screens that you get on them as hardware themselves are very comparable. Different form factors, definitely. So Samsung have the round display with a kind of ring bezel that moves around, is how you navigate around the actual OS, instead of the crown, the twistable crown that you have on the Apple Watch. But they both track heart rate really well. They both do ECG sensing, which is a new thing on both devices as well. It only come out in the last couple of years. And they're really pushing each other, I think, on the health side of things. So there's talk of temperature sensors in Apple devices as well, so you can check your body temperature, not in Celsius, but track it against a baseline to see whether you're a couple of degrees hotter or colder than usual, and might give you an indication of if you're feeling well or not. I know Samsung are doing a very similar thing. And there's blood pressure, I think, as well. It can track on both devices, Samsung and Apple. You have to calibrate it, I think, with an external device. But all of these additional health features and additional hardware that these watches are brought in are very comparable. The main difference is the ecosystem that you're in, and that will, I think, ultimately determine which one you'll buy.
And obviously with the Ultra, there was sort of a push towards the sort of hardcore fitness market. And I think some people really took to it well. Things like the diving functionality, which is utterly lost on me, to be honest. But for those who look after it, I think there are some people who are saying it's absolutely not practical. It's there are other solutions that are better. And there are other hardcore divers saying the opposite. I've actually spoken to a few enthusiasts who said, it's great, it's done away with a really expensive external device that I used to need. Now I can have this, which is not cheap, but it's doing more than my dedicated diving device. And I think likewise with the fitness tracking, the runners, the Garmin, and things you've just been talking about, your die-hard fitness people will probably take some swaying, because they'll have invested themselves in expensive dedicated devices for their fitness. Things like battery life is still a problem, even at sort of 48 hours on the Ultra. For me, that's a step up because of what I was used to, and I treat it like a smartphone. I expect to have to charge it every day. But there's still a lot of people who are used to wearing traditional watches who've never charged them, and that find that kind of mentality a strange one. And for those with fitness watches that will last, week or more, or a week plus without a charge, and they'll wear them every day like a fitness watch as well as an exercise watch, that's a big step backwards for them to have to charge, every couple of days. So, it's not the absolute fix-all. There are, what these devices, the many of them are made, and they're made for lots of different people. And it's, I don't think you can sort of pigeonhole. What I do think is really interesting, and an observation of mine over the last couple of years, is just how far-reaching the Apple Watch has become, like the iPhone. I think we talked about it on the Apple and Android episode. There was that kind of tipping point where it went from being a specialist, expensive device to mass market, and all of a sudden, everyone, base level phones were iPhones. People had iPhones. That was just a thing. And Apple Watches, for me, at least in my circle, seem to be reaching that point.
Yeah.
Almost all of my friends now have got an Apple Watch of some description, and not just them now, but parents, in-laws, people that wouldn't normally have expected to be that tech savvy or interested in technology, now just have an Apple Watch. They just have an Apple Watch. No particular, you ask them why, they go, I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you use it for? Well, they're not running, they're not out doing fitness. But yeah, and it's the thing. In fact, it was an Apple Watch that first tech shamed me. I think I've told you this before. I had a friend, I told him recently, and he laughed because he'd completely forgotten about it. We were at a cafe with our kids, we were buying a coffee, and the lady at the checkout asked me for whatever it was to pay. Got my wallet out, got my bank card out, and I went to pay, and he went, don't you use your Apple Wallet? And I was like, what do you mean? He went, and then he ordered his coffees for his family, and he just got his watch out, double tap, bang, off you go. And I got all the cards set up, but for whatever reason, mindset change hadn't happened, and I was still using the bank cards. And he shamed me that day. And as a techie, I couldn't be shamed, so I dropped the wallet. I've gone all digital. I just carry one card now, and that's the credit card for emergencies. And I religiously use Apple Pay. However, I still cannot get into the mentality of using my watch. I still use my phone.
I'm the same.
It's arguably more convenient on my wrist, but I still get my phone out. I don't know why.
I think it's
just
a
can't get my head into
perception
the
thing.
gear.
I feel like I look more nerdy, I'd say, paying on my watch, because I know many people have a watch, and I don't know anyone that really pays their watch.
I tell you when it's awkward. I don't know about you, but I wear mine on my left wrist. I wear it on the non-dominant hand.
Yeah.
And when I'm driving, that's a pain in the arse at drive-through Starbucks. First world problems I get. But when you pull up and they reach over with the card machine, if my phone's plugged into CarPlay and I don't want to detach it from the car, I have to kind of awkwardly lean across my body and stretch my arm out the window to try and tap my wrist on this card sensor. It's always an awkward experience. It never feels quite as futuristic or cool as I like. But good fun.
Yeah. Well, this is a nice segue, I think, into, and we're coming up on the hour as well, so we'll probably wrap it up quite soon. But the common complaints, I think, for smart devices. So we've already touched on a couple of them. There's some of them are quite bulky. I know the Samsung devices have traditionally been quite bulky, and that was, although I didn't mind because I've got quite large wrists, so I don't mind too much. But I know it would stop a few people. For example, I have my old device, which for whatever reason I'm finding really difficult to sell on the market, because there's too many scammers. Basically,
you're finding it difficult to sell, or no one wants to buy it?
Well, there's too many scammers. That's all I'll say. Selling things secondhand these days is really difficult. So, but I was thinking about donating it to a family member, who's not on the Apple ecosystem, who may be on Android. But I don't know anyone in my family who has a big enough wrist.
Oh, I thought you were going to say I can't find anyone who's got a Samsung device.
No, you don't need Samsung. That would have been
funnier to me, but
you don't necessarily need a Samsung. You can. So if you've got an Android, you don't need Samsung. But if you've got an Android, it supports it. But it's quite a large device. I thought you were telling me that all of your family were on Apple and that you couldn't find anyone to give it away to. No. My family are on Android. See, and I think that might have informed my choice. Yeah, is it?
No, I think the statement I talked over rudely then was you said I might have informed that decision.
Oh right,
you said.
No, they might have informed my decision on initially going Android. Is what I mean.
Oh, I see. I thought you were as the techie in the family would have been the influence.
No. So in my family, it was very much hand-me-downs. Though I think I did when I first got a smartphone. It was my choice. It wasn't a hand-me-down, and it was a Samsung device. So I think I was on the Samsung trend before Apple, anyway, just because of the expense. Anyway,
yeah.
So I can't find anyone in my family to have this this watch. I don't think. I can ask around. I haven't done it yet, but I might ask around. But I think it's too big and bulky a device to just give to anyone. That is a consideration. So bulkiness can be a consideration, even with the normal Apple Watches. I know people who still say it's too big, and they prefer, much smaller watches. So that is a consideration. It's one of the common complaints I hear.
That's a good point, though, just because very quickly, I suppose, if you think about analog watches, they come in such a variety of shapes and sizes over the years, from incredibly petite, like I remember watches my mum used to wear that had almost impossibly thin straps, and the watch face was absolutely tiny, right up to those blingy, sort of chunky metal straps. Huge. I mean, like those, I used to wear the bigger watches in my youth, pre-smartwatches, just because I was a bigger guy, and you have to be. I could carry them. Little watches look silly on me, but I suppose there has always been that range, isn't there? Quite a range, which
absolutely.
We don't really have that, and probably won't achieve that for quite some time.
Absolutely. I mean, my wife, it was one of the reasons why my wife's only recently decided to get an Apple Watch. She was not sold on the smart features, and she has quite small wrists. Her previous watch, like normal watch, was a very small kind of Tissot, like a 5p size watch. It was very, very small. And she did have a fitness tracker, but it was a bit like the Fitbit Flex. It didn't have a watch on it. It was just one of these things that you stick in a kind of rubber band, or she actually had a metal strap to go around this small plastic puck. So she wasn't really interested in Apple Watches just because of the size. She's now got one and she loves it, but it is a hesitancy for a lot of people if they're not used to that kind of size of device.
I was the same. I bought mine for my wife. She wasn't that bothered. She was interested, but felt like it was too much money. Didn't think she'd get the use out of it. So I bought it as like a birthday treat, and she really likes it. She uses it a lot, and she quite likes to track her steps and her activity. And she's not an avid activity sort of freak when it comes to sort of tracking it, but she does. I think in a healthy way, she looks at it and gets pleased when it goes, "You closed your ring today." She's like, "Yeah,
it is quite
I've
encouraging.
done it. I've been moving."
It is encouraging.
Yeah, it's psychologically, it's definitely something that keeps you sort of subtly motivated without becoming kind of in your face and overbearing. I do like that.
So the other common complaint I hear is the regular charging, and you just mentioned it before. The fact that the battery doesn't last longer than a couple of days. Even yours, I'd say 2 to 3 days.
You might get 48 hours out of it, maybe a tiny bit more if you're not using it for a great deal.
But if
I've never pushed beyond 2 days without charging it. So,
but if you're used to watches that last, weeks, months, even, that could be quite jarring, and a reason not to for a lot of people to get on the smartwatch trend. I do find it frustrating. I've got into a bit of a routine now, which is quite good. That if you've got a fast charger and your watch supports fast charging, stick it on charge when you're sat at your desk and you're not needing to use it. Because I do really enjoy doing the sleep tracking. It's one of the main reasons I like smartwatches. So I wouldn't want to charge it overnight and miss out on that tracking. But yeah, definitely a consideration is the battery. It's not something that lasts as long as the traditional watch, which can be.
I think it depends on your mentality as well. Like I must admit, I used to wear watches religiously as a child, a literal child at school. Kind of dropped off it as a teenager, and then I never really wore a watch properly. I might, I had the odd one that was kind of a going outy kind of smart. It was almost jewelry rather than a watch. That makes sense. But I wasn't really an avid watch wearer. I'd got to the point where I had a phone in my pocket that had a clock on it if I needed the time, and I got my phone out. But of course, Apple put a logo on one, and I felt compelled to buy one. But I think because I bought it as it was, without any kind of, not to replace a watch. Its charging routine was more akin to my mobile, which is, I guess, how I've mentally always treated it. It's another tech gadget, not a watch. Does that make sense? Even if it is a watch. So I can completely understand why, for a lot of people, that the charging is an issue.
Yeah.
It just never was for me because of the circumstances under which I bought it and how it kind of got absorbed into my daily tech stack, if you like. And I'm just used to charging things.
Random aside, I forgot to mention it earlier on, but the Forerunner 101, the first version of the Garmin watch, ran on AA batteries. Just thought that was funny.
It looked like it did based on the size.
Yeah, it was.
I'm not surprised to hear that.
The next one is I guess a major complaint, which is that, well, it depends who you are, I guess, but that smartwatches can be distracting, especially if you've got all the notifications coming through when you're working or when you're, in the middle of a conversation. I found myself, if your watch is buzzing, you feel almost compelled to look at it. It's a reflex now. But I have to consciously stop myself, especially if I'm in the middle of a conversation or if I'm in a meeting or something and it's inappropriate to. I need to not check my watch. So I'll acknowledge the fact that I've got a vibrating wrist for whatever notification. But I won't look at it for fear of being judged by the room as being rude. Too distracting is for day-to-day life and not being able to escape notifications. Social media in some respects as well, if you get a lot of notifications from there. Smartwatches can be quite distracting. I don't know if you've had any experience in that as well, Jay.
Yes, definitely. And I completely agree with what you're saying. I think it depends how you look at it, though. So one of the things I often think about is the fact that I will look at my watch so as not to be distracted by my phone and to pick my phone up and start reading a full-blown message. You can kind of acknowledge something and go, oh, no, I can ignore that. I don't need to deal with it. So if the phone's ringing, I quite like the fact that I can just glance the number and go, no, don't need that. I'd have to pick the phone up or make a big gesture out of it. But you're right. Sorry?
That's a really good point. That it's almost it's less rude to check your watch rather than fully crack out your phone and check out who's calling you and see the message.
Yeah. But then I equally get your point around multiple notifications, but I think I've taken steps, just a conscious thing over time, to filter out the notifications. So I turn a lot of the notifications off that I don't feel the need to have come to my watch. So it does kind of it did get spammy at one point with every social media platform pummeling you every time something went off, and it's like Instagram, Facebook, whatever. I turned a lot of those off, so that only the things that I want to appear on my watch would appear on the watch. But I know that not many people will necessarily go to those lengths and actually go in and customize their notifications. They just kind of accept the defaults, and that's distracting. Likewise, I guess the other thing to say is that now with things like focus on the Apple Watch, the phone and your watch can be synced and paired. So whatever you tell your phone you're doing, if you say I'm in work mode and you've configured certain apps to be silent as a result, then it follows over to your watch, so the whole experience is kind of unified. So if you're at work and you don't want social posts going off, you just blank them all out by creating an appropriate focus. Likewise with sleep, my watch doesn't disturb me. I tell you what I do like. And I know we're supposed to be bashing them at the moment for notifications, but a quick positive twist for you: alarms on the Apple Watch. So I don't like being woken up by audible alarms because I find it quite jarring. No matter how much I try to find, and I've tried things in the past like Lumi lamps that wake you up with sort of slowly building natural sounds and lights and stuff like that. Anything to try and wake myself up more naturally, but there's nothing worse than that kind of blaring noise going off that wasn't going off previously to get you kind of shot up and awake. The Apple Watch, I use the sleep platform and everything to kind of program my alarms and my timings and sleep plans, but it will wake you up with haptic feedback. So it basically just it's like someone tapping on your wrist over and over, and it does different patterns until it gets you up, basically. But that's great, one, because it doesn't shock you into life and it brings you around more slowly, but it also doesn't wake your partner up who's sleeping next to you. You might not have to get up for 5 o'clock in the morning to travel to another part of the country. So there are some side benefits, I think.
That is an added plus. I need to figure out how to do that because I haven't done that yet. I've got
I think if you just set any alarm on your phone, they will appear on. It will also appear on your watch.
Yes, I've got that, but my phone still kind of makes the noise.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And maybe if you set the sleep timers up then and set it up under so there's a whole area in the phone now for sleep. So you tell it how many hours of sleep you roughly want, what time you should go to bed and should wake up to get that sleep, and then that also sets you the alarm that goes with it, the sleep timer. And maybe it's specifically that one that does the phone.
I get about my sleep goal almost every day. So
if I have to take the watch off to charge it overnight, then the phone will then go off instead. So if you're not wearing it, it goes, the haptic's not going to work here because he's taking it off. I better blare out a horrible noise and wake him up instead.
I need to look into that. That is a handy feature.
There you go.
But getting on to the last complaint that I thought was quite common amongst smart devices, or smartwatches, is that they're not as accurate as dedicated health tracking. So that spans from even a dedicated chest strap heart rate monitor, it won't be as accurate as that. That is still the default, although the smartwatches are, incredibly accurate now compared to what they used to be, and can be relied upon pretty well as a replacement for a chest strap. But if you really want super accurate data, chest strap heart rate monitor is the way to go. And it's similar to blood pressure monitors and ECGs. Can only do so much on the watch. There are features, they're not really dedicated health devices, which of course, dedicated health devices for these purposes would be much more accurate. And so that's another common complaint I hear is that, yes, they're good, but they're not as accurate as a lot of people who actually rely on this for actual health and fitness. They actually need something a bit more accurate. And it almost goes back to that point about your Ultra watch now. It's got a lot of these extra features that can get most of the way there for some of the more extreme athletes, like the diving. And I've heard that complaint before about the diving is that it can't go as deep, I think is the issue. Although it's good as a computer or a replacement for some of the more expensive devices they need. There are things that it lacks that it gets part of the way there, but might not plug the gap for most people who need that dedicated fitness and health.
There's always going to be extremes, aren't there, that you'll fall without, and I don't think they're trying to plug every gap. And actually, interesting on that health monitoring piece, there was a friend of mine. Her sister had a serious heart problem, very serious one, that she had to live with and medicate for.
Yeah.
And I remember in the early days of the Apple Watch, I said to her, "Oh, you should get your sister one of those because, then she'd have this kind of data. It'd be there to help her if she has any problems." And she said, in the events that she has a problem, it would be great. She said, but because she lives with this problem all day, every day, actually having a watch that, like you said, as good as it might be, may not be 100% accurate.
Yeah.
That could give her these sort of like intermittent little, even if they were accurate based on a condition, these things might be happening to her all the time.
Yeah.
But the watch would consider them to be a health problem, even though that's just something she has to live with.
Yeah.
But actually, it would be more of a barrier in her life because it would create fear and give her something to obsess over. So I do think your point there is a very good one. If you are in relatively good health, these tools are useful just to kind of get a guide as to whether you're better or worse than you were the day before. Or whether this time last year you were your heart rate was generally a few beats per minute slower than it is now, or those things are really good. But I think if you've got genuine health problems, these things aren't necessarily the answer, and actually, you should still stick to those dedicated solutions where they're available. These are more for your average, relatively healthy person rather than someone who's got a severe, health problem to track.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think dedicated health and fitness devices are always going to be paramount. The developments that you're getting in smartwatches made by Apple and Samsung will be made, by the dedicated health watches as well. Health devices as well. So they're always going to be more reliable, especially if you have a condition that needs to rely on these kinds of things. Cool. So we've been through the history. We've been through the ups and downs of these devices as well. I think to close us out, I just want to talk about where we think these devices are going, what the next developments are. I've seen a few in the news, and I know we've chatted about it before, things like blood sugar monitoring. I know particularly interesting from your side. But I want to ask the question, where do you think smart devices are going in the future?
On the spot.
Big question.
Yeah, I mean, from a hardware perspective, I suppose they'll go the same way most gadgets and hardware go. They'll get slimmer and sleeker, and battery life will get better, and all those good hardware improvements. In terms of functionality and what they could do over and above what they already do, I really don't know. I mean, that's it. If you've got anything to throw in, any ideas of your own that spark my imagination, it's really difficult, isn't it? Because they seem to do so much already.
They do. Is there any other health data do you think you could tap into? It is one thing. Another thing is, do you think it could fully replace a phone at some point? I know I've seen a few hilarious YouTube videos of people trying to go, a day or a couple of weeks, or a couple of days, or a week, with just a smartwatch that is able to connect to cellular as well and have it as their sole smart device. I don't know.
Do you know what? I'd be really keen to give that a go. Because really, I mean, it depends on what you do, doesn't it? If you're an avid social media user and stuff like that, you're probably not going to get by very well in that setup. But if all you need a phone for is what a phone more traditionally used to be for, which is making phone calls, sending messages, the very basic communication functions of a phone, I bet you probably could get by relatively well on a cellular connected watch. Because, the keyboard now, as you said, pretty good. Speech to text is actually really quite good on these things. I must admit, I don't use Siri on my phone at all, or my iPad, or my MacBook. I use it on the HomePod Mini because that's the only way to interact with it. But I use it a lot and have always used it a lot on my watch because, and it is basic activities. A quick question, a quick conversion, a weather check, setting a timer. If I'm putting some washing on at home, I'll quite often sort of set a timer so I don't forget it was in there. And I'll go back and take it out. So simple things like that, I use it for all the time.
Yeah.
But in terms of what it could do differently or what it could do, I mean, health tracking, as you said, the blood sugars thing is very much an interest to me. I was, in fact, just today looking at some of the little arm glucose monitors that people wear for their arms now. They're for type 1 and type 2 diabetes. I'm type 2 diabetic, for anyone wondering why that would interest me. Unfortunately, they're incredibly expensive. They're like £50 for a 14-day device, and you've got to replace it again. So it's quite a pricey way to sort of monitor those levels, but important. So something like that would be really valuable, although I don't know how they'd achieve it without an external gadget that's sort of getting into your bloodstream. But no, I don't know. I'm not sure where they go next. I think it will be interesting to see what they do with other developments. I'm not sure the watch needs a whole lot more functionality.
No.
But of course, there's things out there like smart rings. A patent from Apple actually was recently leaked for a smart ring.
Really?
Going back some years now, yeah. It's not one I think that. I mean, they might be working on it. Who knows? Their VR headset, of course. That's another one to keep an eye on, and how they bring all these devices together could be quite interesting. But it already does so much. Even things like just being a remote for your music when you're playing your music and you're out running or walking, and just being able to up the volume or skip a track and stuff like that. I don't know. It's hard to imagine what else they can get it to do.
I'd be interested to see how it develops alongside things like augmented reality. So with Apple perhaps bringing out some augmented reality glasses, whether you could have some kind of interaction with your watch that is beyond the display of your watch, and all of a sudden it becomes much more feasible as a fully fledged smartphone device. It has all the power to do it, and perhaps not the battery, but maybe it does. But then if you had the augmented reality display that sits on top, all of a sudden you've got a much bigger screen that you can interact with. And then therefore you might not need your phone as well. That would be a cool kind of futuristic version of a smartwatch, I would think.
I would like a laser beam.
A laser beam.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's just a wish list now.
GoldenEye, the famous train escape scene where Bond uses the laser in his watch to cut a hole in the bottom of the train. I want a laser beam.
Okay.
I'm not sure there's any practical application for it, but I like one.
Email Apple. We'll get them onto it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I think we'll leave it there for now. That's all for today's episode. Thank you for hanging out with us, and don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube, and subscribe on all good podcasting services so you don't miss an episode as well. You can check us out on Twitch at Jay and Robbie, where we stream a few times a week playing a variety of games. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.